Indy! Welcome to the Hey You Guys podcast. We're your hosts Liam and Rob. And this week, if you hadn't already guessed it from that fantastic intro, we covered 1981's Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, or probably just Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It is just Raiders of the Lost Ark because it doesn't make any sense to say Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It sounds like a boy band. You know, the other ones were clearly built. It's kind of like the whole Star Wars was just A New Hope and then episode 4 was added afterwards. It's just Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay, welcome to the Hey You Guys podcast.
There you go.
Liam and Rob. And this week we covered 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark, starring... Oh my God, I forgot his name. Harrison Ford.
Yeah. That little known actor.
And Karen Allen. You'll have to forgive me. I actually went to the Wales versus Scotland game yesterday, so I've had a...
Which
I got
makes
a bit merry.
All the more unforgivable that of all the quotes you could... Don't get me wrong, I thought your Marion impression was fantastic, and I love that scene. There's something about the way she says it, Indy, but how you couldn't pick one of Salah's many,
oh my God, Salah.
So many great quotes in this film.
Do you want to start again? You can do a Salah quote.
Oh, Indy, why does the floor move? Asps, very dangerous. Bad dates. I also like when he just shouts when they open the Well of Souls and he sees like the dragon statue. Ah!
He goes, sorry, Indy. But
sorry, he's definitely my favourite Welsh Egyptian. No doubt about it. The thing is, he gets away with it because I can't believe we're starting the Raiders of the Lost Ark podcast with John Reese. Well, maybe we can. We're two Welshmen. It makes sense. But he's got that Ben Kingsley thing about him where he looks like he could be from anywhere. Yeah. Like, because I had to look into it. I was like, surely he's got like, you know, a mother from somewhere in Europe or the Middle East or something like that. No, both his parents are just Welsh. He just has one of those faces where he could literally be from anywhere. It's
the Peter Stormare effect, isn't it? If you want any Eastern European person, you get Peter Stormare. Can you do Russian? Yeah, I can do Russian. Can you do Swedish? Yeah, well, I am Swedish. Can you do Czech? Yeah, I can do Czech. He just doesn't change his bloody accent. They just believe that who Peter Stormare is. Like,
in fairness, John Reese did have to change his accent. I don't think he could come in with a Welsh accent. Indy, how's it going, Bert? Yeah. How's it going? Welcome to Cairo, Indy. Oh, it's absolutely marvellous. It is, but it's fucking fantastic. I just don't think that's going to work.
I appreciate that. But he wasn't Egyptian, was he? That accent no. Egyptian.
There were some pretty suspect accents. I got to be honest, I'm not completely sure about Paul Freeman's accent as Rennie Balak. Like when I was younger, I always assumed he was just German as well.
Yeah,
and it was like, dude, of course, his name's Rene, for fuck's sake. He's definitely French. I'm not like, perhaps it's a fantastic French accent. Perhaps, you know, the fact that it's subtle makes it actually better and he's not, you know, walking around with onions around his neck and a baguette and stuff like that. But to me, growing up, it never dawned on me that he was French. It was only a few years ago. I was just like, of course he's French. His name's Rene Balak.
I loved his introduction at the beginning of this film because they're having a chat. He steals the idol from Indy. And he's going, maybe you could tell him if you spoke their language. And then he raises it up, says
Tovito, whatever it is.
Says Tovito or whatever it is. But then, apparently, in their language, kill that man is just... I mean, that's universal.
Yeah. That is universal in fairness. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure his kind of vocabulary went beyond that. But I feel like we've probably missed a bit there by going to the introduction of Balak rather than the introduction of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, so the introduction of Indiana Jones, I do like his introduction to begin with because it's all in shadow.
I like it, I think, is underplayed now. I would argue it might be the greatest cold opening and greatest character introduction in cinema history. I think it's that good.
Pretty sure you said.
I mean, your silence suggests maybe I've got a bit carried away.
You said there's a few. I'm pretty sure the greatest introduction in cinema history was Eddie Murphy last week as well, wasn't it? I mean, I'm pretty sure
very good. I guess if we're being thinking, you know, you can Lawrence of Arabia, stuff like that, you know. Yeah. But I just think we all take it for granted because obviously we watched this film. Indiana Jones was already established. This film came out in 1981. You know, I wasn't born yet. I wasn't born until a year later. So by the time I'm watching the Indiana Jones films, Temple of Doom is already out. He's already a cultural icon. Yeah. But I think if you've never seen this before, I think the commitment of the movie, because obviously they know they've got a star in their hand with Harrison Ford because he's been in Star Wars already. You know, he's a pretty big star off the back of Star Wars, to say the least. But they don't sell this as a Harrison Ford reveal. Like everything about this intro is like they knew straight away that they had the silhouette. They're like, we're not selling you as a Harrison Ford film. We're making an Indiana Jones film. We're making a cultural icon. And from the very offset, like they totally put it off. Like, you know, you don't actually see, like you say, you don't see Harrison Ford's face for the first minute or two.
Mostly just seeing the first time you see his face is when he starts getting the sand, isn't it?
You see it just before that outside when he shoots one of the guys who's about to double cross him. And I think that's a really important scene because usually when you finally get the reveal of the actor's face, and of course they're like, oh, look, it's Harrison Ford and stuff. But what they're doing is establishing the fact that Indiana Jones is actually a bit of a badass. Like that is an important thing because I think it allows them to make him such a fallible character afterwards. Like, I think if the first thing he does is one of these, like, you know, or he only just makes the jump, or he's running away from the Tovitos, or whatever they're called, because that looks quite clumsy almost. Yeah. There's nothing kind of dignified or superhero-esque. There's no parkour in those scenes. He's just running for his life. And the first time, actually, that the Indiana Jones music kicks in, like the main thing, he just swings into the water. There's nothing graceful about that swing.
And it's one... It's like one horn as well. It's just one note of that theme as well. You don't get the full theme for a while, which is really good.
Yeah, you don't.
I wanted to mention that scene as he's running away and he's going to Jock. Jock's fishing.
Right, he doesn't want to give up that fish.
No, but it looks like Jock is... Well, obviously, we know Jock's fishing in the middle of a river. But when he looks up, he clearly sees an embankment. Not an embankment, the field. He can see a field. He can clearly see Indy running away from the...
Is it Jovitos? Jovitos, not Tovitos. Jovito.
So it sounds like a new flavor of Doritos you're going on there.
Yeah.
So he's running away.
Flaming hot Jovitos.
Jock sees him running down a clear field, right? The next time you see Indy then, he's managed to swing on a vine. The embankment is covered in trees.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, that scene. It really doesn't. It's always been an issue. It's just been one of those inconsistent, because as you say, when you get Jacques, whatever his name is, I always hear it as him, it's like he's saying Jacques as if he's like French.
No, I think it's just Jacques.
It is Jacques, but I always heard it as Jacques. You like you say, you clearly see an open field and him having that clear view of Indy with the Jovitos coming behind him. But then even before he swings on it, when they cut to behind Indy, he's running towards trees. So it is an inconsistent, like really early in the film, actually. And I would actually argue that the rougher elements of the film all happen at the start. Like, I think, again, we've mentioned on so many of these podcasts in the past, one of the reasons this film holds up, beyond the fact that it's absolutely fantastic, of course, is the physical effects. They still look brilliant. Yeah. But it's actually in the temple when he's stealing the idol. There are a few bits there when you really see that it is like a stage. Like the bit when Alfred Molina steals the idol in the whip and he makes the jump. You see the floor give way, that is clearly padded. And when he's scrambling with his feet, you can see that the stones aren't stones, that they're made out of like styrofoam or something like that. Well, that was actually the only bit of the film which looks a little bit ropey.
Were those traps designed by stormtroopers, by the way?
I know.
Because... when they're just before they're about to get the idol, Indy does this impressive thing with the torch. He pushes it on a slab. It gets shot by a dart. So then he starts jumping around. That's great. Like he figured it out. Then you got Alfred Molina with that perfect gift that we put on our social media, where he's just rubbing his hands while Indy swaps over the idol. And then that kind of cocks up. So Indy just sprints back. All those darts, not one of them hits him, because I'm pretty sure they were designed or aimed by stormtroopers. Just missed. Yeah,
there was like a foot behind or something. Although it's bizarre because, as you say, everything, all it feels like Indy has to do really is run and he'll survive. Like, don't get me wrong, the Boulder scene is so iconic, and again, it's one of those scenes you just know it wouldn't have the same impact if it was CG. And again, I try to imagine, because I can't remember watching this film for the first time because I was so young, but imagine going to the cinema and you really don't, this is back in 1981, you don't have the internet, all these things, and you're going in relatively cold, and you suddenly got this character, and then that goddamn boulder comes out of nowhere, and it's like nothing that's been seen on screen before. And I totally agree with you. For the most part, you're like, it feels like stormtroopers created these booby traps, but they seem to kill everyone else. Like the other guy who got there first, I forgot his name, he's caught with the spikes. what's his name? Alfred Molina's character, Satipo, I think his name is.
Yeah.
I mean, he is away from Indy for all of 3 seconds, dead immediately.
Dead immediately. A lot of spikes in him.
I know, and that is one of the things, and again, something we've mentioned in the past, but films from the 80s, I mean, this is a family film, but it does not shy away from the violence. I mean, that is an early start. I mean, you get the classic 80s skeletons, a lot of those, but it's not like, he's just kind of impaled in one place. Those spikes are going through his face, and you get a real close-up of it. And even, I was watching it on my own, but my wife, who I mention on every podcast, it just has to be done. She walked in halfway through the film.
In case anyone didn't know, Liam is married. He keeps pointing that out.
I am married to a girl. Oh, my God. And she walked in, and it was just one of the scenes. She's like, Jesus Christ, is Indiana Jones always being this violent? I was like, I know. I was like, everyone talks about the face melting scene at the end for obvious reasons, and that's the reason this film almost got an R rating back in the day.
Yeah, because there's actually head explosion.
Yeah, the head explosion, face melting, all that jazz. But some of the deaths, the way people get shot, there's no kind of like, you see the blood. Like there's one, he's listed in the film in the bar scene as ratty Nepalese man, and he's actually, because when I saw him, I was like, that looks a little bit suspect, that ratty Nepalese man, like a white dude in kind of like dodgy makeup, and it is. No, I don't know. He's the one who, like, he catches fire in the bar, and then Indy just I think it's Karen, like, shoots him in the head. No, Indy shoots him in the head. I do apologize. And you see the bullet go through his head, and the blood comes out. I'm just like, you would not see that in a family film in 2022. No. You also wouldn't see a white dude dressed up as a Nepalese in 2022, for that matter. But there is a surprisingly large amount of violence in this film.
We've gone to Nepal. I wanted to just go back to that opening scene because, again, we mentioned it last week, and we mentioned it a couple of times. It's classic. I thought it happened in here, but it comes from the sequel moment.
Yeah.
Where Indy's falling down the hole and the door's coming down. Indy gets up, rushes, goes through the door before it goes down. In my mind, that's where his hat's off, and he reaches back to grab his hat and pull it through. Yeah. But he grabs his whip. But the whole hat thing, again, is Temple of Doom, isn't it? Yeah. But again, a classic thing where you link the character traits to, and it's not the first film. It always comes from like the sequels, or in Temple of Doom's case, the prequel or whatever it is. It's mad how that happens. I mean, we mentioned it last week with the whole Detroit Tigers. I know it's Lions. The Detroit Lions jacket, and we've said it Weekend at Bernie's 2. We've said it on that one. Like
it happens all the time, and I'm really not saying this for a fact. I had the exact same moment when I was watching the film, because he gets through the door, and I was like, does he grab his hat here? And before it happened, I was like, no, it's his whip. He definitely, because I was like, his whip's already there. He doesn't go back and his hat falls off as well. But it's become the famous thing, the grabbing the hat before it's gone. So you see a closing door, you see Indiana Jones, you're like, oh, he's going to snatch his hat. But like you say, it's from the second film. But I had already mentally in my head painted a picture where his hat falls off and he grabs his hat, but it doesn't happen. But it's amazing how often this happens in these, especially where they're kind of like these ongoing narratives kind of thing. They all feel like they're relatively linked by themes and stuff, the 3 films. But yeah, it's a bizarre thing that I thought the exact same thing when it was happening. Speaking of which, when you're talking about the 3 films, I mean, and we will get back to film, but I have to ask the question, how highly do you rank this film amongst the trilogy? And equally, like, is this like, I had in my head, this is one of like the 4 or 5 greatest cinematic trilogies of all time. I put it that high. I know some people don't, we won't get into the King Crystal Skull thing until later on. We're talking about the original trilogy here. And I know some people have conflicted views on Temple of Doom. You and I don't think we do. We're both big fans of Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
Like, I've got it up there with Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Toy Story. I think Toy Story is maybe actually the most consistent trilogy. But I still think maybe this might be my favorite cinematic trilogy of all time.
If we look back to our Temple of Doom episode a couple of months back, I'm pretty sure we've ranked them then in that one as well. But as I think about it now, and if we put like not so much where the trilogy stands, but the order of films for me, like which Temple of Doom was the one I watched most as a kid, because that's the one that came out because I was born in '83, so that would already have come around, Temple of Doom. So that's the only one I owned on VHS as a kid. So that would be the one I watched more.
Yeah, I think it's the one I watched the most as well.
But if I'm looking at them all now and I'm ranking them, it is definitely 3, 1, and 2 for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A lot of people have 3 as their favorite.
Yeah.
For me, I think this is the best one.
And don't get me wrong, with the introduction of the character, with everything, because 2 aside, 1 and 3 are basically the first and second, the sequels. They all go back to like Egypt. You get all your favorite characters back.
Yeah.
You get except for Bella.
And you forget. I mean, you mentioned before, like this is set after. Sorry, in Temple of Doom is set before.
Yes, Temple of Doom is the prequel, and that's what I'm saying. So, but I don't know why they want. We discussed on Temple of Doom why they did that, but then obviously people wanted more of Indiana in Egypt. So that's what you got for, and then obviously bringing Sean Connery into it as his father. But for me, I think the grandiose statement of 3, where it was bigger scale. Oh, we got more budget to do something now. So we've actually got tanks with the Nazis. We've got got bigger battles. We've got more set pieces, and it all just seems to flow. And I do prefer 3 over 1, but that is a margin. It is a small margin.
Yeah, because... I know. I totally get what you mean, and I wouldn't try to argue anyone off the ledge there, because me saying I prefer Raiders to The Last Crusade is so minuscule. It is the whole Godfather 1 versus Godfather 2. Is it, is Godfather 1 better because it has that initial impact because it's got Marlon Brando, or does the second one get the nod because it's got the larger scale because Robert De Niro's in it? It's like, whether Raiders of the Lost Ark or Last Crusade is better is probably pretty irrelevant because they're both fantastic. I think more important for us...
The film Transformers was based on.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that famous Transformers ripoff.
Yeah,
it's just, I don't know. Like you say, I think I rate the trilogy so highly personally because I think Temple of Doom is so much fun. I think it's the weakest of the 3, but I actually think it's a lot closer to the other 2 than a lot of other people. But yeah, so I kind of derail things there. But I always think it's interesting because I think we are talking here. I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark is in my top 5 movies of all time.
Yeah.
There's no 2 ways about it. And we are talking about maybe the most iconic movie character of all time. Like, I don't think that's a ridiculous thing to say.
I wouldn't disagree with you, but I would also say maybe top 5. For me, I wouldn't class him as greatest movie character, but it all depends on taste, doesn't it?
Oh, well, good. Yeah, greatest is objective. You can say, or subject, sorry, is in so much as it could be a personal taste thing. But in terms of the most iconic, I'm not sure I can think of a more iconic movie character than Indiana Jones. I think if you were doing maybe, but he would be up there. But again, they've got the difference there is that with Bond, which Bond do you put up there? I guess you would probably put Sean Connery, wouldn't you? But with Indy, there's just Indy. It's just Harrison Ford. There's no Tom Selleck version of Indy. Well, there is in the screen test, obviously.
But are you doing character? Because if you say character, it doesn't matter who's playing him. It's just that character, isn't it?
Well, that is the weird thing, isn't it? Like Bond, it doesn't matter who's playing. Well, it does to a certain extent, but you can have different characters. With Indy, he's become so intertwined with Harrison Ford that is the point. It's like you can't have anyone else playing Indy, and that's the problem Disney are going to have, is that they're just when Harrison Ford is gone, Indiana Jones is gone. That's it.
I'm pretty sure Sean Patrick Flannery has aged into Indy's role now, isn't he, from young Indy? So he can take it.
There is that. Or of course, you could have Mutt taking over the title. But my apologies, we've derailed things slightly here. We need to move on to Nepal. Although we will move on to Nepal after and again, another reason why this film is so fantastic is even the exposition is fun. The scene with the 2 government agents when they come in, and so much of the heavy lifting for this film is dealt with in that scene. And they just, again, we all take it for granted, but it probably came as a shock after that cold opening when you got Indiana Jones, and then suddenly you're like, wait a minute, he's a professor, he's a teacher. What the fuck? And they pretty much deal with 90% of the exposition for this film in one sequence with 2 government agents and Indy and his, the head of the college, Marcus, the dean of the college, whatever.
He's not just a teacher, is he? Apparently, he's the best teacher in there. He's the attractive young teacher.
Oh, yeah. He does everything.
I question the time or the friendship you have with somebody to either put "I love you" on your eyelids or get a friend to write "I love you" on your eyelids.
Yeah. It's a pretty dangerous game. I wouldn't want anyone writing on my eyelids. In 1930 with one of those giant biro, whatever the hell they would have been using then. Jesus, it's a brave move.
I got to dip this fountain pen back in some more ink just while I keep going.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But no, I mean, lesser films, they often make, as I said, exposition feel quite clunky and awkward. Here, it all feels like everything's natural. It feels everything they're saying is important, entertaining. Well, it all kind of serves to get the narrative moving as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So basically, you get to Nepal and, you get that stuff with Abner Ravenwood in the background. I always think Abner is one of those characters that kind of gets forgotten about. Like, it's just this name, which is really important to the start of the film, then just goes away. Although some people have suggested that Abner Ravenwood might actually be the guy from the start of Last Crusade. The guy who gives Indy his hat?
Yeah. Oh, maybe.
On the train?
Yeah.
Like that's just one of these rumors. I'm not sure if there's anything to back that up. But, there is...
When...
Yeah. Young Indy on the train when he's like, oh, we've got this belongs in a museum and stuff. And he finally catches Indy, but he's like, oh, you got a lot of hacking, gives him the hat. But there is that weird thing at the start of, I love that they establish so quickly that there's this previous relationship between Marion and Indy, so they can just kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah.
But it is a bit dodgy because
the novel.
Yeah, I mean, she literally says, I was a child, I was in love, it was wrong, and you knew it. And you find out that in the novelization, she was 15 and he was 25.
Yeah.
And
he was a teaching assistant at the time, wasn't he? So it was...
Yeah, she was a child. She was in love. It was wrong. And yes, he definitely knew it. So Indy, bit of a wrong. I know probably different rules in 1925, whenever that would have been. But I love the fact that they were willing to just go, again, something you would never get in 2022. There's no way they would imply that they're the latest big movie star. They're trying to turn him into an icon, but they're going to suggest that, he had a dodgy relationship with a 15-year-old girl.
That's it, though, isn't it? It's just some exposition. It's just some suggestion, as you say. They don't clearly hint and go, do you know what? You actually took me to bed, or whatever it was. It was literally, she just said, I was a child, I was in love. She doesn't even hint or say that it was with Indy.
Yeah.
It's just, I was a child, I was in love. And then you take from that what you will. Until the novelization came in, you take from that what you will. Like, whatever that means to you. Yeah. So,
but I think it's an important part. Like I said, it establishes a pre-existing relationship between the characters. So again, you can hit the ground running. But also, it adds another kind of that sense of fallibility to Indiana Jones, which is such an important character trait for him. And that's why Harrison Ford is so perfect. Like, he's handsome, but he's not movie star handsome. He looks like a dude you could know. Yeah. It's like, he has those moments where it's like he can look totally in control, or he can look totally out of his depth moment to moment. Every fight, it literally looks like he might die. Like he is, living by the skin of his teeth. And it's such an endearing character trait. And I think we've mentioned on previous podcasts, like, nobody takes a punch better than Harrison Ford. Nobody sells it. Like, outside of like the wrestling world, nobody sells getting punched like Harrison Ford. And as I said, I think it's such an underrated character trait because you're kind of totally on board with him. If he was this infallible, perfect, you already having to deal with, everyone loves him, as you say, he's handsome, young teacher, he's obviously the smartest guy in the room everywhere he goes. If he was also this like perfect killing machine as well, there would be a barrier up. But because you watch him and you're like, he's just about, he even says to himself, like, what are you going to do later on in the film? He's like, I don't know, I'm just making this up as I go along.
They were trying to hint to his ladies' man potential as well, didn't they? But they seem to cut it out. When Marcus goes to his house to tell him that he's got the job and he's going to Nepal, he's dressed like Hugh Hefner. And the reason for that, they cut it out, is actually he was entertaining a lady, as it was said. She was in the other room.
Yeah.
So it was meant to see then that Marcus is introduced to the lady or whatever. So you've got a hint to his like ladies' man potential. But they cut it out just for this like world traveler and to get a bit more with him and Marion. So even
I think that was the right choice.
Yeah, I think so. But it's still a bit weird then that they've cut that out, but then he's just at home in his Hugh Hefner smoking jacket.
It is a little bit.
But he would be at home. He would be at home with the villain from Beverly Hills Cop last week, where Eddie Murphy walked into his office and he's just there in his smoking jacket in the middle of the day, just in his office.
It's definitely the 1930s equivalent of just rocking around the house wearing a kimono. It's a bit of a classic shagger look, I suppose. But again, it speaks wonders to Harrison Ford's performance and just how kind of integrated into the character. You just buy it. You're just like, yeah, I'll go with this. He's just so effortlessly cool. Like, and that is the thing. I think maybe because being set in the 30s, that everything's aged like a fine wine. Like the character, like he'll just never not look cool.
Yeah.
Like, even when the few times you see him when he's not dressed in the Indy attire, when, whether it be at the college or the university, at the end of the film, when, he goes to see, again, the government agents about the Ark and he's wearing the hat and the suit. It's just like, yeah, it just looks fucking cool. The 1930s were cool, man. But yeah, I mean, we do, it's only then you meet Marion. You don't need that kind of backlift. You don't need to establish relationship. It's already kind of off to the races. And that's where the narrative really gets going. And it's strange, this film, because you have those two bad guys. Like, I think it's interesting that Belloc, he's not so much a bad guy. He is an alternative to Indy. He's a competitor. Yeah. So, of course, they establish, all right, we need someone genuinely evil. And that is Tot, isn't it? What's his name? It is Tot. Is that that's pronounced?
T-O-H-T, I think it is. So I'll go.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they ever say his name. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. But he is outrageously evil. Like, he is kind of like Nazi incarnate, isn't he? All sniveling, all gross, all willing to do whatever it takes.
I mean, his first introduction when it's "Good evening, Fraulein." Like,
Fraulein? Yeah. And he's doing that horrible, he's so gross. And he looks gross. It's just like, oh my God.
Did you notice as well, the giant Nepalese man who is attacking Indy is Pat Roach.
Is that Pat Roach as well? Yeah.
Yeah. So he dies twice in this film alone because he's the giant Nepalese man and he dies, and then he's the bald bare knuckle boxer dude who gets run over by a plane. Well, actually gets made of mincemeat by a plane's propeller.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, when you were talking about, I did. The guy who is listed as his friend as Ratty Nepalese Man, he's actually played by Malcolm Weaver. And to say he's got some pretty dodgy prosthetics on, it's not quite, what's his name? Martin Rooney, is that his name in playing the Japanese character in Breakfast at Tiffany's? Mickey Rooney, yeah. There's none of it's nothing quite as egregious as that. But again, very 1981, let's put it that way. But there's, as you say, like, Todd comes in, he doesn't actually have a huge amount of screen time, but I think he just kind of represents the Nazis in this film. Like, that's the important thing. Because I actually think the relationship between Indy and Belloc's really interesting. And they have that fantastic scene later in the film when they sit down for the first time across from each other in the market in Cairo. Yeah. And I love that sequence. It's shot in such an interesting way. Like, they don't sit across from each other. Indy sits to the side of him, and they shoot like almost through Indy at Belloc, and Indy's just all sneering, won't even look at him. And I think it's because he knows what Belloc is saying is true. It's like, I'm you, but just my moral compass is slightly off. Yeah. If Indy was willing to push just a little bit further, he's not far away from where Belloc is. He's just the right side of Belloc's career. Good.
Belloc's career is basically just following Indy around and then taking things at the last minute. That's where it's hinted at. That he's done this a lot, even like at the beginning of the film and stuff. But it's happened quite a lot. The whole only reason Belloc has succeeded is because he has gone on Indy's coattails right up until the end, where he has taken the piece that he needs.
Yeah, because he's willing to go that extra mile. He's willing to kind of go beyond, like, don't get me wrong, Indy lives in a moral gray area quite often. This guy isn't an angel. And you see it in his performance as well. Like, he's not always the stoic hero. You see it when he's close to his goal. He almost gets that kind of greedy look on his face. Again, just kind of a fantastic performance from Harrison Ford, where he's like, oh, I'm almost there. And you can see him, like, in that moment, you almost believe he would go as far as Belloc. It's like, I will. And it's actually proved later in the film, and it is a theory we'll get to, that whole idea that Indy, the film would happen even if Indy wasn't in it. Like, nothing changes because of Indy. And obviously, a big part of that is when he's got the RPG and he's got it pointed at the Ark of the Covenant. And in that moment, he's got a decision to make. And he knows, okay, if I don't do anything, the Nazis, are going to get the power of the Ark of the Covenant. But he cannot bring himself to destroy it because of his love for that world. And it's just like, even though it's so detrimental potentially to the world, to Western society, he cannot bring himself to blow up the Ark of the Covenant. It's too important to him, to the point where he will allow the Nazis to take it from them. And obviously things don't work out well for the Nazis, but he doesn't know that. in that moment.
Can we go back to Tot and Belloc? Because there's a scene in the tent where Belloc has, for some unknown reason, pulled out a white dress that just perfectly fits Marion, like in the middle of the desert. Okay, I can understand that a little bit. No, actually, I can't. But anyway, so they're drinking in. They're having a conversation, and he's trying to get some information out of it. And you can see then, as you've already alluded to, that Belloc's not totally evil. He doesn't want anything bad to happen to Marion. He just wants to, in some sort of way, prove that he's better than Indy. Maybe this time he can do something Indy can't.
Yeah.
And he's trying to get information from Marion. That's great. And he's like, if you don't talk to me, you're going to have to go up against Tot. And then when you introduce to Tot again, it's just the way he looks. He's all in black. It's his snidey little comments. He pulls out this, what people believe is going to be a torture device. Yeah. And in that moment, you honestly believe that this guy would use something like this, some sort of torture device.
100%.
And then when he just turns around and it's actually a coat hanger, that is such a left turn.
It is, and I think it's
great. It is great.
One of the things which is underplayed is the how Marion acts in that scene, and it's that difference between Belloc and the Nazis. It's like Belloc is a bad guy, but as I said, he's Indy. He's pushed a little bit too far. But they keep reminding you, it's like, as bad as Belloc is, he doesn't compare to the Nazis, because in that scene you've got Belloc and you've got the Nazis, and even though Marion's supposed to be running away from Belloc. Yeah. And she actually says on the way out, she's like, listen, Belloc, I actually really like you. And I believe it when she says it. It's like, you're a nice guy, but I've got to go now. And then Tot comes in, and what she does, she immediately runs back to Belloc.
Behind him, yeah.
Yeah, and she's like hiding, because she knows it's like, Belloc's a bad guy. I am bad guy, but I am not, bad guy. He's not inherently just... Well, in fairness, as I was saying that, I was like, is anyone going to get the Wreck-It Ralph reference there? I'm glad you got that as Russian. Have you never... Whenever Beth and I talk about bad guy comes up, we always think of Zangief.
Zangief, yeah.
Yeah, I know I am bad guy, but it doesn't mean I am bad guy. So sorry, it's probably good that you asked, so I explained it away. So I don't know what a Hey You Guys reference... Jesus Christ, Wreck-It Ralph reference is doing an Indiana Jones podcast, but whatever. But again, I think you need both sides. One that Belloc it proves that he's not that evil. He's just Indy gone a little bit too far. But then the Nazis need Belloc, because the Nazis can be a little bit boring, because they're the one thing in history where you're just like, oh, they're just the bad guys. They're just evil. And, I think if the only bad guy is Tot, I think it could become a bit one note. And the fact that you have this kind of dual axis of antagonists, where it's like the primary antagonist is probably Belloc and the secondary antagonist is Tot, because he's more just a figurehead for the Nazi party. Again, I think is a perfect move for this film, 100%.
Although, I can't imagine them actually being really bad guys. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the Nazis are not bad guys, right? Whoa. Should we say that? I can't imagine them being a viable force, because they are watching Indiana Jones deal with 12 or like 7 or 8 people on that truck whilst they're in front. They're doing nothing. They're just watching him. Like, they could have stopped. They could have shot a gun. They could have done anything. But in the end, they're just going, all right, well, because they haven't got a clue. Like, it's 3 leaders are terrible. Yeah. They haven't got they haven't got a clue what they're doing.
I mean, we will get to that chasing soon, because I actually think, obviously you have, the famous scene in the Cairo market, and there's no need for us to go through all the details of the fact that obviously the famous scene with the swordsman.
Where he was ill, yeah.
Yeah, and he was ill, everyone knows that. But I actually think this film really kicks into another level. Like, I would argue that this film I'd argue that it's a near perfect film no matter what. But from the Well of Souls onwards, the way it kind of takes off, it's like you go straight from the snakes and the Well of Souls to the plane scene with Papa Roach.
When they escape the Well of Souls, Salah, my friends, I am glad you were not dead.
Yeah, another fantastic line from Salah. He quietly steals the film. He's so good. But yeah, you have the Well of Souls. The Well of Souls scenes is absolutely fantastic. I'm sure we'll get to it in facts. The fact that they thought 1,000 snakes will do, and it's kind of like, I think it's, to my mind, it's the same way. Like, if they're like, oh, I've got £50,000 in cash, and then you see it. and it's actually not that impressive. It's just like a few bundles. It's like 1,000 snakes sounds like a lot of snakes until you put them into a well of souls, whatever that is, and then saying like, I think we need like 10,000 more snakes.
There's a famous fact. I will cover it now instead of where I got it better. I'll explain it better in fact. But one of the assistants was bit by one of the snakes, one of the non-poisonous snakes, and it wouldn't let go of his arm. So he got one of the other guys to grab the tail of the snake and whip it. And the shockwave up the snake caused him to release his bite. Can you imagine being that guy?
Whatever it takes.
Like, there's just a snake attached to my arm. He goes, oh, Liam, do me a favor. Just grab the end of the snake and whip it.
Just give it a yank.
Yeah, literally, just whip it.
Yeah.
And that shockwave.
Well, I mean, it's good that they had a professional
screaming. There's a snake on my arm.
Yeah, I think I'd probably freak out. I mean, there's quite a few like famous scenes, like you say, the fact that when the guys was bit, and I think they've actually removed it from the latest. Like if you watch it on Disney Plus or on Blu-ray and stuff, it looks fine now. But when Indy falls down initially and he's face to face with a cobra, in the initial like VHSs, or if you watch on the cinema, you can actually see the reflection of the snake because obviously they put a glass screen
in between. Yeah.
But I was looking for that when I was watching it yesterday, and I think that they've removed it digitally since. But as I was saying,
are you okay? Do we need to call help?
I think so.
Digitally.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, I got there eventually. I think. Did I get there? That doesn't matter. But as I said, like Well of Souls, playing scene with Bomber Pat Roach again.
Yeah,
you got the chase on horseback. Obviously the scenes with the trucks. Even the scenes on the boat, which I think are really important, and we can go into some of these in more details. The stuff with Mr. Katanga, I think you need that moment with Marion for it to calm down again. Yeah. But it actually, at that point, really calms down, because after the big chase scene, obviously he ends up on the boat. He does kind of, swim over and stow away on a German sub.
Yeah.
But after that, it's probably the most passive ending for any character in a major movie, a major action film. You think you've got the star at the end. The last 20, 30 minutes, he really doesn't do anything. He finishes the movie tied to a pole, and all he says is, close your eyes. But at least, and again, it speaks to this film where it's not kind of focus tested. They're like, okay, we're going to have the action scenes, and they are some of the best action scenes of all time. But at the end, we're going with, well, this makes sense for the character, this makes sense for the story. And if it doesn't end with Indy doing anything and just ends up with Nazis getting their faces melted, so be it. But as you say, it does help that leading up to that, you do have some of the greatest action set pieces of all time. I think, you already mentioned...
Let's talk about the truck, right? That truck is fun. When he kicks the driver the second time out of the window, and the driver does exactly what Indy did, would go down, and then Indy went through, which is a homage to that film Stagecoach, I think it is, where the guy is underneath. But when Indy runs over him, the driver... Did you see his arms and legs just in the air? That was so comedic.
It did look a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of those moments. I actually think the most ridiculous part of that scene is that he kind of offs or, defeats. I'm not sure, I don't want to say necessarily kills them all, but he makes his way through the trucks. He kind of makes his way through so many Nazi soldiers without issues. And it's actually one dude, this guy who looks like Paul Hogan, who looks like Crocodile Dundee at the end, the guy you've already mentioned, who's probably as close as anyone comes to dispatch him with Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Like, he gets rid of 6 guys, and then there's just one dude who doesn't look, when he runs into Pat Roach, Bomber Pat Roach is that big Nazi. You're like, oh shit, look at that. Like, he's huge. And they have that great fight scene where Indy tries to punch him. He gives him one jab and he just lands on his ass. Like, oh, for fuck. That classic Indy thing I look at in my depth. But in that sequence, that dude looks like, he looks about 57 years old. And he's the one who, like, that bit when he, like you say, throws Indy through the window. I have no idea how he manages that.
He's thrown him through the window, and then you've got Belloc, Tot, and I don't even know the other guy's name.
Yeah, the Nazi dude, yeah.
And they're going, come here. So at this moment, they're going, I've got an idea. Ram him into the back of our car. Destroy 2 vehicles.
Yeah, whatever it takes. It's a bizarre sequence, but I think that scene in particular, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the first thing that George Lucas had in mind when he envisioned the character on screen. Like, that is when this film feels most like its inspirations, like those 1930 serials. I know, this film is loosely based on, is it The Secret of the Incas with Charlton Heston? If you go back, it's from 1954. Yeah. And if you see the pictures, like, Charlton Heston is legitimately dressed like Indiana Jones.
They based it on a character called Idaho Jones. Yeah,
that was from the original serials, wasn't it? Yeah, that's where, and I think that's where the inspiration for the Charlton Heston's character came from in was The Secret of the Incas. I think it's just because you see that on the screen, and we recognize Charlton Heston, still to this day, and it's like, wow, that does look like Indy. But of course, that was already based on those serials.
Yeah,
but that sequence, as you say, it just has that classic 1930s vibe from start to finish. Like you say, the action scenes on the truck, the bit when he, like the very stagecoachy scene when he goes under the truck, the whole scene just. When I think of Indiana Jones action scenes, that's the one I tend to go to as the quintessential action sequence.
See, and again,
the fact that it's all done physically.
Yeah.
And if you want to imagine what that scene would look like with CG, watch Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, because the scene in the jungle is what that scene looks like if you rely on CG instead of physical effects. And do you know what that is? Fucking horrible.
Just imagine it in your mind and don't touch Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Just leave it alone.
We'll get to that because I'm a bit of a defender of Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, but not that sequence. That is the worst sequence.
You said that's the quintessential for Indy. For me, it's kind of the same, but again, more grandiose. It's Last Crusade, where he's on horseback and then he's fighting that the German general on the track, and then the general gets caught and he gets run over the track. Do you know what I mean?
But it's quite a similar scene.
Yeah,
they both start on
it hops more from vehicle to vehicle kind of thing, and then And to me, that's more grandiose, and that's done. But they've had more money at that point. They've had more time to do things.
Again, you mentioned it earlier. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people conflated those two scenes. Yeah, like I feel like those two action sequences, you could almost combine bits and be like, oh wait, I thought this bit was from Last Crusade. I thought that bit was from Raiders.
They are similar. They fight. He's chasing Nazis for something on a horse in an Egyptian desert.
Yeah, it's really similar.
Aside from the name change and the reason why they're trying to one's the Ark of the Covenant, one's the Holy Grail. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, you've pretty much got the same story.
Mm-hmm. So, no, it's really similar. Really similar. I mean, they really did go. It is one of those. It could have ended up poorly. That idea that you have Raiders of the Lost Ark, everyone loves it, and then you have a more divisive sequel where they go in a slightly different direction, and everyone's like, no, we like this. We like Indy doing this. We like it to be religious artifacts, all these other things. And they really did go back to the well for the third one, no pun intended there. And you've seen with the most recent Star Wars films what can happen if that goes wrong. Where, they obviously had Force Awakens, everyone loved that. Then the second film was more divisive, and they're like, okay, we're just going to go back to what people liked again. We're going to, throw nostalgia at you all again. And it didn't work. And it for me, it kind of ruined the trilogy, if anything. But with this, they just do it so well that you don't mind. It's like, okay, yeah, they have taken everything I love about the first film, but they've done it brilliantly yet again.
But also, I mean, because of where they are and because of what they're hunting, you can definitely see. I mean, you're not going to find the Holy Grail in Scotland or Russia, or you're going to find it where it's meant to be, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? So you have to.
It's going to be the Middle East again. It's going to be Egypt. All these things. Well, Africa in that instance, obviously. It's a weird. Geographically, I always have that issue. Like, I've been to Egypt. I know it's in Africa, but like mentally to me, it still has that Middle Eastern vibe to it. There's just no two ways getting around it. But yeah, it is interesting that, as we already mentioned, that the end of this film, you have a totally passive Indiana Jones. Like, he's not involved in, we mentioned briefly, I guess we can deal with it now, that whole idea that this film, nothing changes if Indiana Jones is in it or not. And I was like, there's no way. I was really watching this actively. I was like, well, at the very least, I was like, Indy speeds the Nazis up because he finds the Well of Souls. But I was like, that's not actually true, because they're only digging in the wrong place. because Tot has the inscription on his hand, and he's only obviously got because where it got burnt into his hand, so he can't see the things on the other side. But if Indy had never gone to Nepal, he would have just taken the amulet from Marion. They would have dug in the right place initially anyway. They would have gone to they would have found it. They would have gone to the desert. So really, yeah, this film makes if Indy's not in it, it has the exact same outcome. The only difference is at the very end. If Indy's not there, then the Nazis' faces melt, and then you've just got the Ark of the Covenant sitting in the middle of Egypt. So, whereas obviously because Indy's there, it goes back to America.
With or without Indy, that happens. As you said, he gets it. He goes along. They get it. They dig in the right place. They get it. They go along. They burn their faces off. The two fundamental changes. Mm-hmm. The one would be, how would they get and I'm going to say it's too big to be a medallion around Marion's neck, but they're going to get it by killing Marion. So he saved Marion. So that's the one change.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're
going to kill Marion. Torture. They are so going to torture and kill Marion. It's going to happen. Look at the dude. Do you know what I mean? And
fair play.
I mean, he is not taking, 5 or 6 men to gently ask her to hand it over.
No, I mean, you can make an argument that they wouldn't have had to kill her, though. Like, she would have, if he had come in, we're talking, right, she's in Nepal, she's pretending to drink, as far as I'm concerned, because I can't believe she sobers up that quickly. And then, no Indiana Jones, then Todd just comes in with his goons, and he does the thing with the the fire poker. Yeah. I think she just gives it up. I think she's just like, listen, just take it. He's not the dude you send to retrieve it with no collateral damage. Maybe. Okay, I'll give you that.
He's dead. And the last one then, okay, as you've just said, what happens is then the Ark is just there, just sitting there. If Indy wasn't there, Nazis are dead, then the Ark is just sitting there. But sooner or later, it's going to end up back in Nazi hands because they're the ones who know where it is. So they will retrieve it. So it's going to end up back in Nazi hands. So the reason why Indy's there then is for it to go back and to the American government, and it gets stored away. So without Indy,
that is the big thing.
Without Indy, it then becomes the Nazi super weapon.
Exactly. So like all the build up, I was like trying to affect timelines. I was like, the timelines are almost inconsequential because I was like, if Indy's not there, yes, they wouldn't be digging in the wrong place and all that jazz. But that is the big thing, is like people are just overlooking the fact that, okay, the Nazis wouldn't know what to do with it, and they would find all their compatriots with blown up heads or melted faces, but they would have the Ark of the Covenant. Yeah. Hitler would have the Ark. But because Indy is there, regardless of the fact that he's quite passive at the end, he's in a position to ensure that it goes to the American government and doesn't fall into the hand of the Nazis. Yeah. And I would argue that is actually a pretty big thing.
And that's it. So I do totally agree with that. I mean, that was made famous in The Big Bang Theory, wasn't it? That whole theory about...
it already existed, but was made famous by it for sure,
But Indy being useless or not needed in this film at all. But if you look at the end of it, it's mainly because if Indy wasn't there, it's going to end up in Hitler's hands, and it's going to be used as a super weapon.
Instead, it ends up in America, and you have top men working on it. Who? Top men. Yeah, that's the important thing. You wouldn't get to that fantastic line at the end of the film.
Although I will go through the fact that can we trust the Americans to have it?
I mean, in fairness to them, they put it away in a box. They seem to be pretty understanding that they don't know what to do with it, because obviously the start of Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, it's still in the same box. Still in the same, I'm not sure what it is, an IKEA storeroom or whatever.
Area 52 was it?
That is one thing I don't think you can argue about. When you talk about these movies, is that the one thing they always do is nail the start. Like, even those who don't like anything about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it has a great intro. I love the intro if you stop watching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull just before that gopher pops out the ground, you'd be like, that was pretty fucking good. I love the opening to Temple of Doom. I love the young Indy stuff at the start of Last Crusade. But again, I would argue that the best is still Raiders of the Lost Ark, which might have the best opening to any film.
The only thing I question about the opening scene of Last Crusade is the fact that Indy gets every trait you know about him in one afternoon.
Yeah,
everything
even the
you know
scar
about
in his
Indiana Jones, he gets in one afternoon. He becomes afraid of
100%.
snakes. He gets his scar. He gets his hat. Do you know what I mean? Everything.
They really establish his, the fact that these things belong in a museum. Everything happens in that 10-minute period on that stagecoach.
Yeah.
Not stagecoach, that train. I do apologize.
I wanted to say about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, terrible film, but I appreciated what Kate Blanchett was doing. Like, she was really selling it. She
does swing for the fences, and we will get to that in Legacy. And I'm trying not to go overboard on. Again, I feel like I get too defensive about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull because I think there's half a good film in there. I legitimately think there's half a good film in there, and I think in any other world, if you're not comparing it, I think it's a perfectly decent 3-star film. I think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, despite one or two, and we've mentioned before, the scene in the jungle, some of the stuff with Matt, when it's bad, it's really bad. There's some really good stuff in that film, which I've watched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, not ironically, I'd like to add, I'd say like a good 5 or 6 times. There's not many films nowadays which I watch a lot. If it's on TV, I'm like, yeah, I can watch this film. It's usually around the bit where the truck goes off the edge and lands on the tree and kind of bends down. I'm like, all right, I know everything after this is dodgy CG and aliens. I'll turn it off here. But the first half in particular, I'm like, this is a good fucking film. But anyway, we need to wrap up on this film. I can't believe we're wrapping up on Raiders of the Lost Ark talking about Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls.
Well, that's your fault.
This is my fault. I've only got myself to blame. So we'll quickly go into, and just to be clear, we're fully aware that there's 1,000,001 things we haven't talked about, but there's only so many hours in the day and we can't turn this into a 6-hour podcast. You could take any scene from this film and we could rattle on for an hour, but you have to you have to call it a day at some point. So
at some point,
we'll quickly run through our love and hate. This is a bit of a tricky one because I love everything about it.
I want to establish the rules this week. You cannot mention anything about the sequels. It has to be about this film.
Fair enough. That's fair enough. Although it is weird because I don't hate anything about this film.
If you haven't got any hates, you haven't got any hates. But you can't, because you haven't got any hates, you cannot then throw shade on further films.
No. It is about this film, but it's kind of hate adjacent, if that makes sense. But love is, love is so many things. I've just picked Harrison Ford. I just think his performance, we can go into, the big what ifs with Tom Selleck and stuff. I think Harrison Ford absolutely sells the concept, the idea of Indiana Jones. I think it's easy to forget what a great performance it is because there's so much going on in this film. This is a film where we're talking about all the stars aligning. This is a great coming together of cinematic talents, the right talent at the right time. You've got the star, you've got the creator, you've got Lucas, who's always been better as a visionary rather than a director or writer. He's doing the right thing here. You've obviously got the director, you've got the producer, Frank Marshall, the screenplays by Lawrence Kasdan, the cinematographers, Douglas Slocum, the composers, John Williams. This is all the right people in the right place at the right time. So there's so many things to love about this film, but fundamentally, I don't think it works without Harrison Ford. 2, and I've said it on so many of these movies, looking back at them, physical effects. I think that it's the reason you go back and this film hasn't aged a day. Yeah. And 3 is the score. Everyone knows about the theme, but from beginning to end, that John Williams score hits every single note so perfectly. So those are 3 of the things I love most out of a myriad of things I love about this film.
So for me, Indiana Jones, the introduction of Indiana, the character, the way he is, everything about him, he's just so cool. He's just so, and like you said, he's fallible. Mm-hmm. It's like he's not super archaeologist or wherever he's meant to be. Oh. Everything fails around him all the time, but he keeps pulling himself back up. And he keeps moving forward, and that's where
he gets his ass whipped. Yeah, that's why I love that scene at the end of the film, which we didn't go into a great deal. The scene on the boat where it's him and Marion, and basically they just take 10 minutes to say, "Look how battered Indy is." It's just like, dude, I've had my ass kicked. That's it.
He's got that line, hasn't he, about the mileage? It's not the mileage.
Yeah, it's not the years. It's the mileage. That's it, yeah.
Which he said himself. He actually ad-libbed that. That was an Indiana,
did he really?
That was a Harrison Ford quote. Yeah.
See, he's ad-libbed some of the greatest lines, obviously in Empire Strikes Back, I Love You, I Know, and stuff like, that was largely Harrison Ford. And that sums up the character perfectly. As you say, it's just, I'm doing all these things, but it doesn't mean I'm not hurting everywhere. I'm just a dude who's willing to go that extra mile. Sorry.
I got a few of them, in fact, But the second thing I love, which is going to be random, are the sound effects, not the visual effects, the sound effects. Like this has some of the best punching sounds ever. And they managed to do that by hitting a load of leather jackets with a baseball bat. That's how they get the sound.
Really?
Yeah. Awesome. And there's another one where I can't remember. Like I said, I've got it in facts where one of the sounds of something is one of the guys putting his fingers in cheese salad or something. And then he's got cheese casserole and just move. Yeah. And where they're lifting that very heavy polystyrene well of souls from the Ark of the Covenant. Do you know the lid?
Yeah, the lid, which they kind of pick up pretty easily, in fairness.
Yeah, and the way they make it sound heavy is the sound director recorded him lifting his toilet cistern. Like,
really?
I don't know how heavy his toilet cistern is or what it's made of, but it makes that polystyrene thing sound really heavy. But they lifted it.
It does. And I love all that kind of, all those DIY elements. So even a film as big as, I know Steven Spielberg was still pretty early in his career, but make no mistake, this guy had made Jaws and Close Encounters. And he's already probably the most famous director in the world at this point. And still, you get these totally DIY moments, kind of thing, of guys just on the fly, just doing whatever works, to make the scene kind of come to life. And those are those kind of magic moments you don't even think about. So it's a great thing to actually, bring up, I think.
And lastly, I'm surprised you didn't have it, Salah. I love Salah.
I mean, I could so easily add Salah. I love John Rhys Davies in this film. Yeah. He might be Wales' secretly best export ever.
So that's my three loves.
Hate. I mean, there's very little to actually even vaguely dislike about this film. So I'm going to pick Nazis. Don't really like Nazis. Tot, because he's just he's Nazis incarnate. And I'm a little sad that the monkey died. The monkey was really good. And even we are talking about a monkey who did give a Heil Hitler salute, but he was still an adorable little monkey. And
voiced by Frank Welker, by the way.
Was it really?
Yeah, all the monkey sounds were Frank Welker.
Fantastic. And let's be clear, like Indy might have died if the monkey hadn't taken the hit with the bad dates. So
yeah.
Another reason to be sad for his untimely passing. Although I just assume that every monkey who's what is he, a capuchin or whatever?
Yeah.
I just assume that they're all Marcel from Friends. I'm like, it's that same monkey's been alive for like 70 years. It's just him in all the films. But yeah, as I said, those are kind of like hate adjacent. I hate Nazis, kind of a nothing statement. But I love this film and everything about it.
Well, I'm going to have to do it now, aren't I? Because I can't turn around and say I don't hate Nazis. So yeah, number one, I hate Nazis.
Just to be clear, yeah.
Just to be clear. Number two, Karen Allen's voice as the film went on started to do my Sweden.
But she has the Indy.
Yeah, and that's great. And I thought that was really good to have a quote. But as the film goes on and she says Indy, Indiana, more and more and more, my God, I just wanted to shut up.
I love Karen Allen.
I love her. I think she's great. But as it goes on, I just need you to stop for 30 seconds.
I mean, she's actually the reason that a lot of people had issues, and we mentioned this on the Temple of Doom podcast, was because Willie was such a kind of girly girl, wasn't she? Yeah. And, you come into this, especially in 1981, you got such a strong-willed, female lead kind of thing.
I'm pretty sure that was one of my hates in Temple of Doom as well, was Willie shouting Indiana.
Yeah. In fairness, she does shout quite a bit. Like, you've got to find something. You've got to find something to hate.
And I don't have a third, mate. I'm going to bow out of the third. I don't really have
so you didn't mind the monkey dying? You're not a fan of monkeys, or?
Monkey dying.
Monkey dies, you'll get over it.
Monkey lives, monkey dies.
Monkey dies, yeah, whatever. Facts, again, I assume you're going to have to kind of, pick your battles of this, because there are
did you see?
Bajillion.
Yeah, it just kept scrolling and scrolling. So I've had to,
just pick 4 or 5 of the best ones. We'll go with that. Because loads of them people already know, I guess. That's some of the casting with Tom Selleck. Although I didn't know that supposedly Danny DeVito was supposed to play Salah, but similar to how Tom Selleck was stuck filming Magnum PI and couldn't get out of the contract, Danny DeVito was in a contract filming Taxi at the time. Yeah. And he couldn't get out of that. So in a very different world, you could have had Tom Selleck and Danny DeVito in this film.
It's kind of why he went on and did a Romance in the Stone, because he wanted that kind of adventure.
Well, he plays almost the same character. He's a bit more evil.
He's evil Salah.
Yeah, he's evil Salah for sure.
Okay, so this one I actually tried to find when I read it and then I was watching the film. Freeze framing during the Well of Souls scene, you can notice a golden pillar with a tiny engraving of R2-D2 and C-3PO from Star Wars. Mm-hmm. They're also on the wall behind Indy when they first approached the Ark.
Yeah. They're pretty clear. It's pretty awesome. Cool little, I guess you'd call it an Easter egg nowadays, wouldn't you?
Yeah. While filming the snake scene inside the Well of Souls, a python bit first assistant director David Tomlin's hand and wouldn't let go. Tomlin calmly asked someone to grab the python, still attached to Tomlin's hand, by the tail and whip it, so that the snap would send a wave up the snake's body and force it to let go. A stagehand did just that. The python released its bite from Tomlin's hand, and Tomlin got medical attention. The python itself was not injured.
Cool.
What else have we got here? Most of the body blow sounds were created by hitting a pile of leather jackets with a baseball bat. During filming in Tunisia, nearly everyone in the cast and crew got sick except Steven Spielberg. It is thought that he avoided illness by eating only the food he brought with him, a lot of cans of SpaghettiOs. Like, I'd be asking him if he's okay at this point. Like, are you all right? You're just eating SpaghettiOs. Like, are you
yeah. But then 2 days later, when you're all just absolutely spewing out your back end, and he's just there happily eating a tin of SpaghettiOs, like, well, obviously somebody made the right choice. Although, like you said, it wouldn't have led to one of the most famous scenes in movie history. So, God bless food poisoning.
I've never heard anyone say that before.
I know, right?
This is interesting because this could have ended up a lot worse. The out-of-control airplane actually ran over Harrison Ford's knee, tearing a ligament in his left leg. Lucky for him, the heat had turned the rubber tires soft, so it did not crush the bone. Rather than submit to Tunisian healthcare, Ford had his knee wrapped in ice and carried on.
What a trooper.
Can you imagine, though, if the heat hadn't softened that rubber up, he's just destroyed his leg. Just his knee. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And it just goes to show, Harrison Ford, man, this guy loves getting injured on his sets.
He loves it. I was going to bring it up just then, but I was like, he's been in plane crashes, but it just feels like every movie he's on has to take 3 months off because Harrison Ford's got injured yet again.
Didn't he break a leg in Star, the last...
I'm sure he did. I probably did
Force Awakens.
Blade Runner.
I'm sure he broke a leg in Force Awakens.
I think for the latest Indy they were filming, they had to stop filming for that.
They've had to film around him for a bit because he's
in fairness, he does do a lot of his. I mean, you watch this film and obviously, stuff like Tom Cruise is made famous for. Don't get me wrong, he very much does have a stunt double in this film, but he does a lot of his own stuff in this film. Make no mistake, he's pretty gutsy.
The sacred idol of the Havitos, of which Dr. Jones takes possession at the beginning of the film, is apparently a fertility goddess. It is a molten image of a woman squatting down and giving birth.
Nice. Yeah, I can buy that.
To create the sound of the heavy lid of the Ark being slid open, sound designer Ben Burt simply recorded him moving the lid of his toilet cistern at home. To achieve the sound of thousands of snakes slithering, Ben Burt stuck his fingers into a cheese casserole. This was augmented by applying wet sponges to the grip tape on a skateboard. It just sounds awful, doesn't it? Just move a cheese casserole around.
You think you might just, considering that they've got 10,000 snakes, perhaps just record snakes, but maybe they're not as slithery as we imagine. So, you need the cheese casserole. Fair enough.
Ford was cast in Blade Runner because of his performance in this film.
Another absolutely iconic character. It's just not fair that he gets to be Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Deckard, all these characters. Unbelievable.
Karen Allen expressed disappointment in the film. Although her performance had provided many new opportunities, she lamented that her character had been motivated more by a relationship with Jones and money than with her father and his obsession with the Ark. Which is understood because
it is. I mean, we mentioned at the top of the podcast that the whole thing about her father, Abner Ravenwood, is kind of swept under the rug pretty early doors. It feels like, going back and watching it with fresh eyes, it feels like that's going to go somewhere.
Yeah.
But really, it's just an excuse to get him and Marion back in the same room. And as you say, it does just become about their previous relationship at that point.
Right, two more for me. Indiana Jones never kills the lead villain in any of the films. It's always the treasure itself or greed for the treasure that accounts for their deaths. Which, as you look at it is, absolutely.
Yeah, Mullah Ram, he goes after the little stone idol thing and falls off the cliff. He's fighting with Indy in that scene, but it's not. Indy doesn't pull him off. And in the last one, the dude picks the wrong cup, face mud. So totally.
And finally, I like this one. The submarine pen on the island where the Ark is taken and finally opened is not a set, but in fact an actual German U-boat pen left over from World War II in La Rochelle, France. Producer Robert Watts was so amazed at how preserved the submarine pen was, even down to the graffiti on the walls, that he described it as an actual set in existence. It's insane, just to use an actual German U-boat pen.
Yeah. Actually, I think that whole sequence is maybe the oddest of the movies, and I appreciate you need to get from A to B at the end of the film, but it's the only bit of the film that I'd actually think about changing. I just think it kind of slightly, like, it's needed, but at the same time it slows the movie down a little bit. Like, there are a few things like they're willing to just kind of like overlook, like when Indy just happens to come across Marion in a tent in the desert. Like, he thinks Marion's dead, and he just pokes his head into a random tent just by chance, and she's in there. He's not looking for Marion, he thinks she's dead, and she's just there. And like, don't worry about that, we're just keeping the narrative moving. But that whole sequence when they've got to get, obviously, Indy to back to where the Ark is and stuff, I'm like, it kind of slows the movie down a little bit towards the end. And obviously there aren't any major action beats. You've already had the major action sequences. I think it maybe does slow the film down a mite, but that is my only criticism of this film.
Fair enough. That's me for facts anyway, so we can move on.
Yeah, I mean, again, talk about picking your battles. I do apologise. In terms of legacy, we've already talked about this potentially being one of the greatest trilogies in cinema history.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the mixed bag of the fourth film, which has tarnished things for a lot of people, as I already mentioned. I actually think there's half a good movie in there. I think it just goes off the rails in the second half in particular. Indy 5 is still going ahead.
Yeah.
Short of all these injuries, is due to be released in what? Is it next year? It's supposed to come out, I think.
No,
now.
This year, isn't it?
Again?
Is it this year?
I thought it'd been delayed. Maybe it is this year. I think it's been delayed to next year, though.
Oh, okay. I mean, the inclusion of Phoebe Waller-Bridge makes you... what's the word? Not joyful.
Optimistic?
Optimistic, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, like I say, I think everybody would prefer Harrison Ford to sign off. If this is to be his last performance in Indiana Jones, you want him to go out on a real positive note. And despite me making, claims that there's good stuff in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I'm not going to pretend that it's a great, send-off for the character. I want there to be an Indy 5, and I want it to live up to the quality of the first three films.
I mean, I have hopes. Directed by James Mangold, who did Logan, so I have hopes for...
Yeah. It sounds like they've got a lot of the right people involved, and hopefully they can learn from the mistakes of... But again, there's that dangerous thing here. We talked about it earlier, where they've already gone back to the well once with Last Crusade, where they're like, oh, this worked for Raiders. People weren't fussed on Temple of the Doom, so we'll go back. They got away with it once. Now that they've done Crystal Skull, and I appreciated that they were trying to do something different. The fact that it was a 50s film. It was based on B movies rather than serials from the 30s. It was even shot in a different way. It had that kind of soft glow to it, like a 50s film. I hope they don't just go back to, all right, we're going to try and recreate, and they're not, because it has to be set in what, the 60s?
I think it's set in the 60s, yeah. So I think it's around like Cold War and stuff, I believe.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. So they're almost certainly we're going to be dealing with Russians again, for sure. But yeah, I mean, fingers crossed, it's the film we all hope it'll be. There's obviously the Young Indiana Jones series, which I never got involved in. I mean, you already mentioned the lead actor. I don't even know his name.
Sean Patrick Flannery.
Did he do a good job? Because I literally never watched a single episode.
Yeah, so it was all right. I mean, the whole point of it is the fact that it was what was it? It was a learning show. So it was all historically factual.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So Indiana Jones goes through and like he meets Henry Ford of the Ford cars. And it's less about him globetrotting and more about just his he'll meet Henry Ford, and like Henry Ford's daughter was kidnapped, so that all of a sudden the young Indiana Jones is, and it's tail-ended both ends by like old Indiana Jones telling the story. Harrison Ford old again.
Yeah, is it? I've got a picture in my head of him playing like a saxophone or something.
Yeah,
is that?
Yeah.
That's the main thing I remember is just Harrison Ford being old back then Harrison Ford, I suppose, playing the saxophone and stuff. But yeah, it seems to be kind of, some people think quite hot, certainly people have fond memories of it. I never watched it personally.
So it was a lot of, well, there was quite a few episodes, but then they cut them, they moved all the episodes then they cut them into like 4 or 5 young Indiana Jones films.
Yeah.
So you'll watch a film of Indiana Jones and all of a sudden he's jumped from one place to another place. Like, they don't carry on because they're episodes that they put into films. Yeah, but
it's kind of like the opposite of when we were doing the Transformers the movie podcast, that they took the movie and they cut it into 5 pieces, so it worked as episodes. It's kind of like the opposite of that, I suppose.
Yeah,
but yeah, beyond that, I mean, obviously, legacy. There's there's video games, there's board games, everything. There's fancy dress, as we already mentioned, the most iconic character. But one of the big things is its impact on video games. And, obviously, there's not actually been that many great Indiana Jones games. Some people would argue that some of the games on the PC were great. I've never been a PC gamer, so I can't speak to those. But it's more how it's inspired some of the best video games. Like when you think of video games, like 2 of the most iconic characters are Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, and Nathan Drake in Uncharted. And they're just Indiana Jones ripoffs. There's no 2 ways about it. In terms of his own video games, the only one I ever really remember enjoying was The Emperor's Tomb, which was released for the original Xbox in 2003, which was one of those bizarre, snake eating its own tail, because you've got Tomb Raider was a rip-off of Indiana Jones, and then The Emperor's Tomb Indiana Jones video game was a rip-off of Tomb Raider, which was already a rip-off of Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
But the best example is obviously Uncharted. And I know Machine Gun Games? I think they're making the latest big budget Indiana Jones.
Yeah, they've been on about it for a while, haven't they?
Yeah. But we've not seen anything for a while. But of course, for once, the answer to it, who do you want making the Indiana Jones video game? It is Naughty Dog. It's 100% Naughty Dog. You just think, and especially if you throw real budget at it, you get Harrison Ford reprising. That is the one thing he could do, is the voice work.
Yeah.
They might have to digitize it slightly, and you just think, well, even after he does Indiana Jones the film, it's like, get him back, do the voice work. They've already got great writers there, and have Naughty Dog do an Indiana Jones film. Of course, that's never going to happen, and they're already doing a game with Machine Gun. But I don't think there's a more perfect fit in the world than just Naughty Dog doing Indiana Jones.
Because I mean, Uncharted has that going around the world, solving all the mystery, and you could make, because Indiana Jones is searching for, he's not really searching for treasures, he's searching for one thing, usually just one piece of history.
Yeah.
So it could be on a not as grand a scale as what they do for Uncharted as well, but I think they do it so well. I think they have the story beats, and like you said, if you get Harrison Ford to come back and be Indiana Jones and that, I agree. I mean, of course I'm going to agree. And well, Uncharted's one of your favorite series, and that's not underplaying. Like, Uncharted's a great series, and in particular, the storytelling is fantastic. And actually, randomly, a very enjoyable film. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I've seen the reviews were pretty much what I expected. I've heard that it's a bit too, again, one of the issues, like as a comparison piece to, and I've not seen it, so I don't want to be overly critical, is that it all feels a bit too clean, a bit too CG heavy, it doesn't have that same sense of threat, because everything feels perfect. And you even see, I don't know, I'm not sure if he is a fallible character. I mean, that is the point of Nathan Drake. Like, he is a take on Indiana Jones. The fact that he is always surviving by the skin of his teeth, I suppose.
I feel that was, and I'm not going to turn it into the Uncharted film podcast, but I do feel that was what you got. In regards to, and I'm not going to go too much into it because people haven't seen it, but also I went with one of my friends and he had to leave the cinema early for family emergency. And he's one of our regular listeners, so I don't want to spoil it.
Don't spoil it for me, because I'm sitting here talking to you and I haven't seen it.
No, it's not for him, not for you. But it feels like, for me personally, it's probably the best video game adaptation I have seen. Which isn't hard.
It's a low bar for sure, but still, I would take, honestly, just kind of vaguely entertaining. And I feel like it's one of those films, and again, this is someone who hasn't seen it, the knives were already out for this film.
Yeah.
So when I saw that the reviews weren't fantastic, it hasn't put me off, because I'm like, unless it was a complete surprise, and I'm not suggesting for a second that this is going to be a brilliant film, but this feels like one of those films where a lot of reviewers, critics, I think, would have already made their mind up. And this film probably hasn't done enough to change their minds, but I suspect it's perfectly watchable, and I'm certainly going to be giving it a go.
As a fan of the games, you get the history beats, you get the story beats, the treasure, the set pieces. You get everything you want from the game. pretty much. So I'm in on it. I thoroughly enjoyed when I watched it, so I've done no problem with that.
Fair enough.
Right, should we move on?
We can't end. We should end on something slightly indie. I mean, usually we talk about the score. We've already mentioned John Williams, the fact that this is one of the great movie scores, and this is a guy, obviously, even amongst his myriad of talents. I mean, this guy did Star Wars, did Superman. He does have a very distinct sound, kind of in the same way that Danny Elfman does, but it's a much more classical sound. It sounds like a kind of traditional score, but you can still tell it's a John Williams score. So yeah, the score is fantastic. We don't need to go into any more detail. So we'll go to the, I don't think you can get any surprises from me in terms of recommendations and scores. It's a 5-star film. I recommend it. I don't. Yeah. It's 5 stars.
It's 5 stars, and we recommend it.
Yeah. So we don't need to talk any more about that. If somehow you haven't seen Indiana Jones, sort your goddamn life out. I don't actually know. I haven't made a pick for next week. Okay, so as for next week, I think it's my choice. Is it my choice?
Yeah,
my choice.
Because I had Indy this week, didn't I?
Of course. So yeah, I'm just obviously in like a bit of an Eddie Murphy vibe at the moment. So I'm going to go for the Golden Child. 1986 is the Golden Child specifically. So
nice.
Yeah, a bit of an odd one. I think it's one of those films where a lot of people have very fond memories of it. I'm not actually convinced it's that good. So it's going to be really interesting going back to it. I know it's got a lot of great moments, but I feel like it's one of those films that could go either way.
A great turn by Charles Dance. I have to admit.
He's great in it. But I feel like this is one of those after the kind of guaranteed home run of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think this is one of those more interesting films where we both have fond memories of this film, and I know a lot of my friends have very fond memories of The Golden Child. But kind of like in the same vein as say Inner Space, you're like, I wonder how good this is actually going to be.
It definitely has the feelings of Big Trouble in Little China, where you've got the Western audience or the Western introduction with Eddie Murphy or Kurt Russell.
Is Egg Shen in it as well?
So Egg Shen is in this, and I'll tell you who definitely is in it. Egg Shen is in it as the voodoo. Sorry, not the voodoo guy, the temple leader. But Lo Pan is in it as well.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot of crossover with these.
Of course, there's going to be a lot of crossover. How many Asian American actors did they have back then?
Well, obviously not that many, apparently, because they're all in the, they're just kind of on repeat in 80s movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is going to be one of those interesting ones where I can't say with any confidence that I'm either going to love or hate. I don't think I'm going to hate it.
Well, at the moment in time, I can say with confidence I'm probably going to love it. But the last time I watched this again was well into double-digit years ago. So
yeah, me too.
I may have changed my mind because I remember going into Inner Space thinking I love this film. Coming out,
exactly.
Flight of the Navigator. Going into Flight of the Navigator thinking I love this film. Coming out of Flight of the Navigator.
That's how I went into it.
Fuck was that?
Yeah, I went into Inner Space and I was like, I have such fun. I'm like, I'm going to enjoy this film. And I was like, it's not actually very good. So I feel like this is one of those ones that could go either way, which I think is important. As I said, we don't want to kind of...
What a build-up. We want people to listen to next week's episode. Come and listen to an episode that we may not like.
Well, no, that's the point, because I don't think there was any danger of us going, returning to Indiana Jones, and saying, "Oh, surprise, surprise, Raiders of the Lost Ark isn't actually as good as you remember." I think everyone knew Raiders of the Lost Ark is still fantastic. These are the interesting ones. These are the ones that sit on the line where I think it'll be a lot of people like ourselves haven't seen this movie for over a decade. You have fond memories of it, and you're like, "Oh, I wonder." Is it still good? So that that's part of the fun of this podcast. So please join us next week and find out if The Golden Child is as good as you remember, or if it's in fact actually pretty shit. But as always, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode on Raiders of the Lost Ark, and see you soon, I suppose. Catch you.
Episode 51 next week, isn't it? So we're coming close to our anniversary, our year of actually doing this podcast,
which is insane. I can't believe it's been a year.
Absolutely. But again, thanks for listening to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we'll see you next week for The Golden Child. Thanks again.
Cheers, bye. Oh, yeah, and before I forget, because I always forget, here's Rob telling you where you can actually find us.
Yeah, so we're currently on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Hey You Guys 80s, or at Hey You Guys 80s. And we're also on email at heyyouguys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any emails, any recommendations, or any reviews you have. But whilst we're on about that, wherever you get your podcasts, please also smash the subscribe button. Yes, I said smash.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Leave us a review and leave us some 5-star ratings as well. But make sure they're 5-star ratings.
Yeah. We're not interested in 1 star. 5-star. If it's not going to be 5-star, don't move smashing anything. Just leave your opinion to yourself. 5-star ratings only. But yeah, if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you next week.